This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 9. Welcome to the 9th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility related. If you enjoyed today's show, please remember to stop by the blog and leave a comment in the show notes for today's episode. So you'll find that as well as all the podcast episodes at fertilityfriday.com/podcast. And you can find me on Twitter at Fertile Friday. And I'm very excited and honored to welcome today's guest, Sally Fallon Morell, to the show today. Sally is the founding president of the Weston Price Foundation. She is the author of the best-selling nutritional cookbook, Nourishing Traditions, as well as the author of Eat Fat, Lose Fat, and many other publications. Sally is the leading spokesperson for a return to nutrient-dense diets, including raw milk, animal fats, organ meats, bone broths, and lacto-fermented foods. And today we'll be talking about the important role that diet plays in fertility and overall health. And so without further ado, I'd like to welcome Sally to the Fertility Friday podcast. Welcome, Sally.
Well, thank you, Lisa. I'm happy to be here. It's a favorite subject of mine because, as you know, the problem today, the main problem is infertility. Not too much fertility, but infertility. And it's a very heartbreaking condition for so many couples.
Absolutely, and I can't wait to get into that a little bit further because a lot of this knowledge is even new to me. Until several years ago, I had no idea the important role that diet played in issues of fertility. And so you've been working diligently for so many years to kind of inspire and to encourage the return to a more nutrient-dense traditional diet. Maybe you could talk a little bit about where it all started and what inspired you to start the Weston Price Foundation in the first place?
Well, it started when I read the work of Weston Price. It's a book called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. And I read that in the 70s and brought my children up that way. I have 4 children who pretty much grew up on a nutrient-dense diet that included lots of butter, egg yolks, organ meats. We had broth every week. We did all of these components of the traditional diet. And it definitely worked for my kids. They were extremely healthy. And so then I thought, well, we need to put this work into a public-friendly form because Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, Price's book, is pretty daunting to read. And that's when I wrote Nourishing Tradition. So we founded the Weston A. Price Foundation to keep these issues alive, to continue to show the scientific validation of traditional foodways, and particularly the importance of animal fats in the diet, and especially for fertility. And, of course, in doing so, we're flying right in the face of what I call the diet dictocrats who want everybody to use vegetable oils and not animal fats.
Yeah, and to delve into that, I mean, it's crazy to me how everybody still believes, not everybody, but it's still such a prevalent belief that vegetable oils are better for all of us in terms of health. And the people aren't really aware of how detrimental they can be.
Well, all of this was carefully crafted by the vegetable oil industry. They've spent the last 100 years demonizing their competition. And what is their competition? Butter, lard, tallow, bacon fat, all these wonderful, stable, healthy animal fats. They've made it seem like we should feel guilty to use butter and that we're vulgar if we cook in lard. And yet these fats, especially if they're from animals raised outside, provide the very nutrients that we need, not only to get pregnant, but to have a problem-free pregnancy and beautiful, healthy babies.
Absolutely. And so for anyone who is listening in and maybe they're not that familiar with the Weston Price Foundation, or they're not really that familiar with the work of Dr. Price, I know it's quite a long story, but maybe if you wanted to talk, because I think it's such a fascinating story how he traveled the world and discovered kind of the most nutritional type diet. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that history.
Yes, he was a dentist, and he actually traveled the world looking at teeth, which is something that you can see very easily. You can't see inside the body, but the teeth are a mirror, a sign of how the body's been formed and how healthy it is. And he found 14 primitive populations who had perfect dental health. That means they had no cavities and they had no dental deformities. That means that everyone in the tribe or village had naturally straight teeth. They had broad faces, naturally straight teeth, and beautiful physiques. And then he tried to find out, well, what's the common denominator of all these diets? I mean, they ranged from the real high meat and fat diet of the Eskimos to the diet of the South Seas to Switzerland to off the coast of Scotland. So all these diets were very different in the actual foods that they ate. But he was looking at vitamins, and the key finding was that these diets were very high in the 3 vitamins that we get exclusively from animal fats and organ meats and certain types of seafood. And these vitamins are vitamins A, D, and K. And they are in certain foods, all the foods that we're being told not to eat, but the very foods that these primitive people considered sacred. So certainly organ meats like liver, seafoods like fish eggs and shellfish, and the fish liver oils in particular were considered sacred, fish livers and fish liver oils. And then in land animal foods such as egg yolks, butter from grass-fed animals, and again, the organ meats and the animal fats. Let me just give you one example. Bear fat. The treatment for infertility among the American Indians was called the bear fat diet, and the couple who couldn't get pregnant just ate bear fat for a month. That's all they ate, and it worked every time, worked 100% of the time to eat this bear fat diet. I sent some bear fat off to be tested for vitamin K, which we know is essential for fertility, and it was the highest thing that they'd ever tested. So I'm not saying that you need to eat bear fat, but you need to eat foods that are high in vitamin K, like butter, egg yolks, liver, and especially cheese. Fermented aged cheese is very, very high in vitamin K.
That's absolutely fascinating. That the wisdom of the traditional people, I find it to be very fascinating, because it must have come from years of observation.
Well, who knows where it came from? They said it came from the gods, and that they had a connection with the spiritual world, which gave them these answers. But however they had this information, we don't have those ways of knowing things anymore. We have to go with the science. And what I love is how the science validates these traditions.
Yeah. And, for me, until I had really discovered the Weston Price Foundation and all of kind of the teachings of traditional diets, I didn't really understand the concept of food as nutrition, or maybe understand isn't the right word, but I'd never really thought about it that way. I always kind of thought more of food as fuel. I'm hungry, got to fill the stomach, so I'm not hungry anymore. And I always ate what I thought was a healthy diet, but since I was just eating to satisfy hunger, I just didn't really think of, the nutritional content of the food I was eating. So you did mention that when the diets of the traditional people were tested, they were found to have an extremely high nutrient content. Maybe you could expand on that a little bit so that...
Yes, well, they were higher in all the nutrients than our diet. They were higher in all the minerals. They were higher in vitamin C, all the B vitamins, but they were particularly high in these 3 fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, and K. And again, the government and what I call the diet dictocrats, they don't want you to know this, because to get these vitamins, you have to go against their advice. And their advice is to completely avoid saturated fat and to use vegetable oils instead, and to basically have a low-fat diet. I'm sure you know about the study that came out a few years ago where they found that women who were doing low-fat diets had much more trouble getting pregnant compared to women who were eating full-fat dairy and butter and cheese and everything. And the response of the scientists was really criminal. They said, well, if you're having trouble getting pregnant, eat these high-fat foods until you get pregnant, and then go back to your low-fat diet as soon as you get pregnant. Now, it only makes sense that the same diet that you need to get pregnant is the diet that you need to have a healthy baby. But, they don't see it that way.
Well, and one of the things that actually has motivated me to start my blog and to even do this podcast is to try to kind of do my little part in the world to shift the consciousness, because a lot of women are trying to get pregnant and the goal is to get pregnant. And I feel that that's important, but the shift needs to be more than just getting pregnant.
Pregnant, yes.
And more towards understanding how to have healthy babies.
And that is the number one purpose of the Weston A. Price Foundation. We have what we call a preconceptual and pregnancy diet, which should be followed by both the man and the woman before conception at least 6 months, and even longer if they've had a particularly bad diet or if they've been vegetarians. This diet includes cod liver oil, lots of butter, lots of egg yolks, a quart of raw milk every day, raw whole milk, liver, and I think I said cod liver oil, and bone broths and lacto-fermented foods, all of those things. And we have that on our website, and I can tell you that we've had some beautiful babies born on this diet. If you go to our website and Google Healthy Baby Gallery, I'm sure your listeners will be very inspired by these beautiful babies. And the pregnancies are easy. The births are easy. It's really worth doing.
Yeah. One of the when it comes to the traditional teachings and the works was learning that in traditional cultures, not only were there the prized sacred fertility foods, but they were given before anyone was trying to get pregnant.
Right. They really worked at having healthy babies. They did not leave this to chance. They knew it was their responsibility to eat properly, and actually they couldn't afford to have unhealthy babies in their culture. At the same time, they limited their pregnancies. They made sure that there was 3 years between each child. So they sometimes did this by just practicing abstinence within the couple. It was taboo to have sexual relations between the 6 months of pregnancy and when the child was 2 years old. But they just thought it was shameful to have the children too close together. And you didn't want to be shamed in your tribe or village. You didn't want to be on the outs because you had nowhere to go. So it's very interesting to see these practices. And, in the West, in so-called civilized cultures, when you compare them to what these primitives did, it just seems very irresponsible. We don't prepare for pregnancy. We don't tell young women what to eat for fertility, and we don't feed ourselves right when we're pregnant and breastfeeding and so forth. We don't even give the right foods to growing children.
Yeah, there's a serious lack of information there. And there's just some sort of disconnect, because I feel like the focus is, because of course in my blog it's about fertility awareness and also fertility in general. And so women usually kind of get into that fertility awareness, let's try this out and see how it works, when they're trying to get pregnant. And right up until they're ready to start trying, they're usually often on the pill.
Yes, which is very depleting, very depleting. We tell women to wait a year after they've gotten off the pill before even trying to get pregnant.
And could you talk a little bit about why you would recommend that? Because, if a woman's going to her doctor and says, when should I go off the pill? The doctor would say right before you're ready to get pregnant.
I know. For many reasons, the pill creates all sorts of mineral imbalances, including too much copper. The pill really disrupts your own natural estrogen production. And I think it interferes with a number of vitamins also, including B6. And you really want to get your body producing the hormones in the right amounts at the right time before you get pregnant, and especially estrogen. When you get pregnant, your body needs to be able to produce huge amounts of estrogen in that first 3 months. And to produce estrogen, you need a lot of things. You need saturated fats in your diet. You need vitamin A, big time. You cannot produce estrogen without vitamin A. You need cholesterol. Estrogen is made out of cholesterol. And so you need to get that estrogen production right and working in a rhythm, and all these hormones are produced in a rhythm before you get pregnant.
Mm-hmm. And, you mentioned that you need the saturated fat and the cholesterol to produce estrogen. And
you absolutely do.
That would be because the cholesterol is the precursor to these hormones to begin with.
Yes, and saturated fats support hormone production, whereas the unsaturated fats in modern vegetable oils interfere. They interfere with hormone production.
And maybe you could speak to, as much as there's kind of this internet movement to embrace butter and saturated fat, your average person, if they're trying, let's say if they're on a diet and they're trying to lose weight, the average person thinks that eating fat is going to make them fat. So maybe you could talk a little bit about, how good fat actually is.
Well, a lot of people lose weight by eating saturated fat and butter, and we've had a lot of people tell us they lost weight just by going on our diet. But I can't make promises. Not everybody does, and some people have to cut back on the carbs. But my first question would be, are you too thin to have a baby? Because you do need to have a little bit of fat on you to have a healthy baby. And so I'm not saying that you want to be, overweight, but I think you should be a medium weight to get pregnant and not too thin.
Okay, so for a woman listening, she's in that phase where she's kind of trying to get pregnant. We've kind of talked a little bit about some of the foods that should be on her radar, but maybe we could talk specifically to that woman. So this is all new to her. She eats a regular diet, she cooks her food in olive oil or whatever. And so where should she start?
Well, I think number one, she should get on lots of butter, and preferably butter from grass-fed cows. She should get on the cod liver oil that we recommend to get the A and D in her diet. She should eat lots of cheese. The better the quality of the cheese, the better. She should, prepare all her own food. You can go to our website under health topics. I think it's under healthy children. We have a diet for preconception and pregnancy to follow. We actually have a refrigerator magnet with this diet on it. I don't know if you're aware, but I also have a book called The Nourishing Traditions Book of Baby and Child Care. I wrote it with Dr. Tom Cowan, and we spend the first several chapters talking about preconceptual diets in that book.
And then ideally for someone who is trying to get pregnant, what would you say to somebody who's having a hard time? What would you say to someone who's kind of been tracking their cycles? Maybe they're having low mucus production, or they've tried for several months and kind of nothing is stuck. Would you suggest for them to hold off on trying and then implement this diet for a while?
I would get those cycles right. I would get on this diet. I'd watch them. I'm sure they'll come into a more normal rotation, so to speak. But I would get that all right before you get pregnant. One of the things that we find, people get on our diet, they've been trying to get pregnant, and very often they get pregnant immediately, and that's not good either because they really haven't had enough time to prepare. They've done the right things to get pregnant, but their bodies are just not ready. So we've seen this happen many times. So I would say you want to make very sure that you don't get pregnant for a while. But isn't it shameful? People will go to these fertility clinics and have all sorts of procedures done that are extremely expensive and embarrassing to their husbands, and obviously not the right way to get pregnant. And none of these doctors ever talk about nutrition.
Yeah, it's true. It's kind of like this idea that it all exists in a vacuum, and if a person is infertile, it's just random. Like it's
just
not
random,
related
or I say we blame the 3 Gs: germs, genes, and God. We don't take responsibility for ourselves.
Yeah, it's kind of a scary thought. And I have lots and lots of questions to ask you, but one of the things that kind of led me on this path to discover the Weston Price Foundation and its healthy diet was actually after I had my son. I was looking into all these diets. I was, watching all these movies. I'm kind of nerdy, and I actually started to try a vegetarian diet. And I actually started to try a vegan diet, and I actually ended up getting quite sick. I actually ended up having kind of deep pigmentation in my skin.
Ooh.
Yeah, and it was a result of a severe vitamin B12 deficiency, and it kind of cleared itself right up as soon as I switched over to, diet with lots of fats and lots of organ meats. And, as much as I could, following the tenets of Western price inspired diet. So
Yeah.
I'd just love for you to touch on, because I know everyone is different. Everyone's on their own path, and so I can't say what's right or wrong for anybody else. But could you talk maybe about the effect of or the impact that a vegetarian or vegan diet can have on fertility?
Yeah, I don't have any trouble saying that if you want to have healthy children, do not do a vegan diet, and probably you shouldn't do a vegetarian diet either. There's just not enough nutrition in that diet to produce a healthy baby. And if you want to be taking care of a damaged baby for the rest of your life, just get pregnant while you're a vegan. And we see it all the time. It's just tragic. Your body needs the animal foods. It needs the foods of the earth to produce the body of a baby. If you want to be a vegetarian or a vegan much later in life, when your years of procreation are over, at least you're not harming anybody else when you do that. But you have a responsibility to eat a nutrient-dense diet while you're pregnant, and there are just not enough nutrients in a vegan or even most vegetarian diets to do that. You won't be getting any A or D or K. You will be short in iron and zinc. Zinc, of course, is necessary for neurological function. You won't have enough arachidonic acid, which is critical for having good brain function and good integrity to the gut. You won't have enough cholesterol, which is critical for the neurological system and the digestive system. So you need to put your ideology aside while you're going to have healthy in your childbearing years, and bite the bullet and just come to the realization that every culture on earth nourishes itself with animal foods, and it's the animal foods that they considered sacred foods. So that's just what it means to live in the world and have healthy children.
Yeah, well, one of the interesting things is that it's such a contentious topic, because it's so tied in with ideology, and also, if you wanted to research, you'll find 100 websites that will tell you that you can get all of your vitamins. You can get your vitamin A, you can get your vitamin B12.
I know.
And from my understanding, one of the, statistics from Dr. Price's work was that when they studied the traditional diets, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they found upwards of at least 10 times the nutrient value in the traditional diets versus the regular.
It's not that you are just getting a little. You're getting huge amounts in these traditional diets, especially preconceptual diets. And yeah, you might get a little vitamin A from a vegetarian diet, but it's never going to be enough.
Well, yeah.
And same with all of these others. I mean, B12, it's just no way you're going to get that from a vegan diet without taking a supplement.
Well, yeah, and often, the B12 shots are fairly common and necessary, and so it kind of begs to question if the diet was providing what you needed. Would you need the B12 shot? But the fact that what we think we need, the recommended daily allowance of these vitamins versus what you would get on a Western Price Foundation diet, it really begs to, it calls into question, how much do we really need? Because it would seem as though we actually need significantly higher amounts of these vitamins
than the RDAs. And in fact, those RDAs are really the survival amount that you need, just to survive. But they don't give you what you need for periods of stress, and having a baby is definitely a period of stress for your body.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that you touched on as well was the emphasis of kind of spacing children.
Yeah, That's also backed up by science. And you need the optimal length of time between pregnancies is 3 years. That's for the avoidance of birth defects. And it's also the ideal time for the emotional development of the child. If you have your children too quickly, then babies don't get that absolute attention from the mother that they need. They need that for at least 2 years. And she's distracted by another baby, and the children then feel deprived in some ways. Now, by the time they're 2, they don't want mom to be hovering over them all the time. They want to forge out and create their own independence, and that's a great time for mom to have another baby.
And part of it is my understanding, part of it is to allow your body to kind of replenish.
Absolutely.
I always
Yeah.
say it sounds kind of silly, but for me, it actually took having a baby to really get that tangible concept. Where did he come from? I mean, everything
Yes.
I ate was basically what made him, and
Yes.
it comes out of you. And so then if you're not taking the time to replenish those nutrients, then
Yeah.
it kind of makes sense. But I've also seen the flip side. I've also seen people argue, well, I know somebody who had a baby every year for 4 years, and they're all fine. So why
You're
would we need
taking a
to?
chance. You're taking a chance. And what do you mean by fine? One of the things we mean by fine is that the children don't need braces. Because that shows when the children have enough width in the dental palate, it shows that the diet was good and adequate. And can you say you had 4 children in a row, one year after the other, and none of them need braces? That's very different.
Well, one of the questions I wanted to actually ask you, kind of going back to when we were talking about the vegetarian vegan diets, you had mentioned that sometimes the children aren't as healthy. And
Mm-hmm.
could you expand on that? I mean, so if someone's listening, what does that mean? Like, what kind of defects are we talking about?
Well, of course, Price was looking at the shape of the face and the shape of the jaw. And that's one of the things that shows up, a very narrow face, a narrow jaw, so the child needs braces. But, if that's all, it's the problem, you can fix the teeth. But very often it comes along with mouth breathing because the sinus cavities are not capacious enough to just bring the air in from the nostrils, so they have to breathe through their mouth. And this leads to all kinds of problems. The ear tubes, the ear space around the ears often is much more constricted, so these babies are very prone to ear infections. One of the things we're seeing today is horrible digestive problems in our babies who can't seem to eat anything, babies who throw up all the time, babies who are very picky eaters and seem to only want things that are bad for them, like processed carbs. Babies with all sorts of digestive problems, and these often go with the behavior problems. The gut and the brain are very connected, and so we're seeing behavior problems, learning disabilities, and of course the worst of these is autism. But even before that, you have a baby that misbehaves all the time, that is just into everything, won't listen to directions, cries all the time. That's very, very hard on the family life. And it's not meant to be that way. The babies born when they follow our diets are happy. They rarely cry. They take directions easily. They like to obey. They like to be good. And that's what you want in a baby. You want all your children to be healthy in this way, and you want having children to be a wonderful experience for the whole family.
And that's pretty profound, because you're suggesting that, well, not suggesting, but just stating the fact that that this diet is not just, making sure they have 10 toes, but also it impacts their overall health, their mood, their gut health, and just their overall, like, that's a...
Yeah. Well, the 10 toes are part of it. The 10 toes are part of it because vitamin A, in spite of what you may have read, is very important for preventing birth defects. And one of the most interesting things that's been discovered in the last few years, it has to do with stem cells. So the fetus starts out as an embryo of stem cells, and these are undifferentiated cells, and they are waiting for signals. And the first signals they get are, to some of them, make a heart. And so they differentiate into heart cells, and then they'll get a signal to make a spinal column or make a lung or whatever. Where does this signal come from? The signal is vitamin A. And if you haven't built up vitamin A before you get pregnant, by the time you know you're pregnant, it's really too late because the heart has already formed. And if those cells are not getting the right signals because you're depleted of vitamin A, either the heart has an anomaly, like a hole in it, which, by the way, is extremely common today, or the heart just doesn't form, and you have a miscarriage. And this shows the wisdom of these tribes. They built up foods that were extremely rich in vitamin A, foods like liver and fish eggs and all of these wonderful nutrient-dense foods that are just not in the modern diet unless we make an effort to put them there.
Well, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about vitamin A. I've read the articles on the website about vitamin A, but that's kind of the only place where you, in a sense, where you get information about vitamin A that doesn't warn you, actively that vitamin A is dangerous if you get too much, and we have to be worried about it, and we shouldn't, overdo
Well,
it.
that warning comes from just one study. It was a very, very poorly conducted study. There was a lot of criticism of this study, and it's a study that contradicts all the other studies about vitamin A. And most studies show that up to 30,000 units a day is just fine for pregnant women. Now, that vitamin A does need to be balanced with adequate vitamin D. So it's no good just taking vitamin A pills. In fact, we don't recommend that. We recommend eating liver and balancing that with foods rich in vitamin D like lard, egg yolks, and so forth, and by taking cod liver oil.
Okay, and could you talk a little bit about vitamins? Because I know that it's one of those topics that is not highly recommended. And so why might it be better to get your vitamins from food sources versus synthetic vitamins?
Yeah. That's what happens when you get pregnant. The only dietary advice people get is take a prenatal vitamin. And there's just problems with these prenatal vitamins. One of them is that all the vitamin A is in the form of carotenes, beta carotenes, and this can really pose some problems. The vitamins are generally not in natural forms, and they're not all there. And folate, for example, people are getting a lot of synthetic folate now, and that's causing problems. You really need to get these vitamins from food. Now, if people do want, they feel like they have to take a prenatal, we do have one that we recommend. It doesn't have any carotene or vitamin A in it because we recommend that you also take cod liver oil at the same time.
Okay. Yeah, I think that that's really great advice because I can only speak from my own experience, but for years, for example, I was low in iron for years, like for a decade. And, I would take iron pills just because that was all I knew at that point. I didn't ever I was never opposed to liver, but I never knew how important it was. But either way, those iron pills, I took them all the time and my iron level never actually moved. And it wasn't until I started eating the foods that I actually see a dramatic difference in my everything, in my energy, and also the test itself.
Well, and actually, you cannot absorb iron without vitamin A. And this is something that most doctors are just totally ignorant about. So again, usually if you take cod liver oil and just eat red meat and liver, and then your vitamin A will go up, and also, your iron will go up, and also the liver contains vitamin A, which works in concert with the iron. So again, these things are synergistic, and you really need to get them from food. And by the way, it's very important for your baby to have adequate iron. Anemia in children can lead to very withdrawn social behavior, almost similar to autism, extreme shyness, reduced learning ability, and so forth. So this iron is very important.
Now, that's definitely a lot to think about. One of the things that we've kind of touched on a little, you mentioned miscarriage. So I'm kind of in that age, 30-something woman, and all my friends, are kind of in that age too. And until you have a miscarriage, because, I actually had a miscarriage, but until you have a miscarriage, you don't really know how common it is, because it's when you have one that you kind of talk to your friends, and all of a sudden out of the woodwork, everyone tells you about their own stories. Now, I feel like in this day and age, you'd be hard-pressed to find a woman who, there's lots of women that get pregnant, easily and have healthy babies. And, I'm not saying that everybody's ill, but what I'm saying is a lot of the people that I know and a lot of the people in my life, whether it's they had a miscarriage or it took them, even friends that have wonderfully healthy babies, took them several months to get pregnant, even over a year. There doesn't just seem to be an easy path for most people. There usually seems to be some sort of stumbling block along the way for many people.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's 1 in 3 pregnancies ends in miscarriage. It's a number like that. Well, I'll tell you a story. My 5th pregnancy ended in a miscarriage, and I was perfectly healthy in every way, and I was doing all the diet, but that was the time when we had these really strong computer screens. And I only read later that they were very much associated with miscarriage. And I was sitting in front of one several hours every day, And this was in the early days of computers. So I'm convinced that's what caused my miscarriage. Because otherwise it was just an uneventful pregnancy. But I miscarried at 3 months, which is the normal time. And I'm just wondering, and I really think we need to look at this, all this use of cell phones, iPads, smartphones. I've seen pictures of women sitting there pregnant with, resting the smartphone on top of their bellies, very close to them. And we recommend that you just get rid of that smartphone or iPad while you're pregnant. We just have no idea what these things are doing.
Yeah, it's kind of scary because, no one really knows. And
No,
even if it
right.
does have an impact, we don't really know to what extent, like how scared we need to be about.
Yeah, I think it's just best to err on the side of safety.
Yeah, absolutely. We touched a little bit on raw milk. Maybe you could talk a little bit about raw milk in general, because I live in Canada. I live in Ontario, and
it's hard to get there.
Yeah, it's kind of hard. I was actually told by a local farmer that there was like a 2-year waiting list to
get on the list.
Yeah,
really a shame. Yeah. Raw milk is just a wonderful food for pregnant women. It provides them with all the calcium they need and in a very absorbable form. It's a great source of B6 and B12 and good fats. But don't despair if you can't get raw milk. Everybody can get cheese, and just get raw cheese if you can, but the best quality cheese is available.
And sorry,
do a lot of bone broth.
Just to throw in
more
there,
than one way to skin a cat.
Yes, but just to throw in there for anyone who, because I take for granted that everybody would know what that is, but what exactly is raw milk, and how is it different from what we get in the supermarket?
Okay, so raw milk is milk that has not been processed. Typically, it comes from cows on pasture. It's full fat, and it has not been heated. And when you heat milk, you destroy the enzymes. That's the definition of pasteurization. All the enzymes are destroyed. And those enzymes are there for a purpose. Every vitamin and mineral in milk has an enzyme that helps you absorb it. So unlike other foods where you might absorb, maybe 20%, 30% of the nutrients in milk, raw milk, you absorb 100%. So it's just a great way of ensuring that you're getting good nutrition throughout your pregnancy.
And for those out there that, I was raised in this, era of pasteurization. And so we were all told that if it's not pasteurized, it's going to kill us. So
yeah, right. And it's really a Rust Belt technology. It's no longer necessary. We have the technology and the knowledge today to get clean, healthy raw milk to everybody that's perfectly safe. And in fact, even without those technologies, raw milk has an excellent record of safety. Since 1972, when the CDC started keeping records, there has not been one single death from raw milk in the United States. And there have been 77 deaths from pasteurized milk. So it's just not true that raw milk is, unusually unsafe. I'm not saying that no one's ever gotten sick from raw milk, but compared to other foods, it's a very safe food.
Okay, and then for, I guess, my fellow Canadians who maybe don't have, maybe they have access or maybe it's not as easy, do you recommend regular milk at all, or? I
really don't. I used to, but the more I learn about pasteurization, and particularly ultra-pasteurization, which is what most milk is done to today, I would just go for the cheeses instead.
Okay. And then for all those ladies out there that still drink skim milk or 1%?
Oh, no. You don't want skim milk. The goodness is in the fat of the milk. You want whole milk, whole cheeses.
Yeah, because I was actually, one of my friends was talking to me about, I think it was Weight Watchers, and I was thinking to myself, I'm like, oh, the diet I eat must be really high in the points because I eat all this fat. Mm-hmm. And I tried to Google how many points I'd get for this 10% Greek yogurt that I've been eating.
Yeah.
And I couldn't even find it because it was like the program didn't recognize full fat. The only thing that it recognized was 0 fat, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is not a healthy diet, and it's the reason that so many women are having trouble getting pregnant.
Yeah, because the fat plays such an important role to
yeah.
sustain. fertility. So we've talked a lot about fertility diets. Maybe we could talk a little bit about, you touched on it a little bit, but first foods for baby, because I know that when I had my son, everyone was telling me to get him rice cereal, and that seems
Right,
to be
cereal.
what everybody does.
Yeah, and that's the very worst way to start off a baby. Well, the best food for baby is breast milk, and breast milk from a healthy mother. So breast milk from a mother who's eating this diet that we're recommending. And then as he transitions to solid food, the first foods we recommend are egg yolk and liver puree, chicken liver puree. You want to do this between 4 and 6 months. By 6 months, that baby really does need extra iron. Mother's milk is actually kind of low in iron, probably because you want zinc to predominate in the early months. But by 6 months, every traditional culture is giving some food to the baby, and usually it's liver. The mother usually chews the liver and then gives it to the baby. But you can puree it. You don't have to chew it and give it to the baby. And I'm very concerned about moms who want to do exclusive breastfeeding for months and months. This is not a contest to see how long you can breastfeed. You know, it's what do traditional cultures do to ensure that their baby is healthy.
That's good to know, because of course the recommendation is at least 6 months, or and then.
Well, you can breastfeed as long as you want. That's great, but you don't want to exclusively breastfeed after 6 months.
Okay, and then been talking about how the fertility diet also applies absolutely when you're breastfeeding. But there's still kind of this idea out there that no matter what the mother eats, the breast milk will have everything the baby needs. So does the diet impact your breast milk directly?
It absolutely does. And we have a long section of this in our book on baby and child care. There's just a lot of studies showing that many, many vitamins are affected by what the mother is eating. Iron, B12, B6, vitamin A, vitamin D, all these critical nutrients. And I'll just give you an example. My daughter, who works full-time, was doing a lot of pumping of her breast milk, and her breast milk was a deep yellow color. It was just beautiful, thick breast milk. And I have seen pumped breast milk that looks that looks bluish and thin. But she was producing just gorgeous breast milk because of the diet she was eating.
Yeah, that's so important, because like I said, for me, I've been on kind of this journey as well. And these are the types of things that I wish that I had known before I knew I had plenty of time to prepare, but I didn't know that I should be preparing.
Yeah, that's what we're here for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I hope that I can help other women on their journey, just to put it on their radar, because once you have your baby, actually, that's one of the questions I wanted to ask you, because I'm sure there's women listening who now are starting to feel really nervous, or maybe they have a pit in their stomach. Maybe they're pregnant and they had no idea. Like, is there no hope, or what can you do?
There's always hope, and it's never too late to start. I mean, if you're pregnant, you haven't been doing this diet, start tomorrow. Go to our website, click on health topics, and then healthy children, and get on our diet. And I'm not trying to, all this information's on our website, but if you want it in book form, it's the Nourishing Traditions Book of Baby and Child Care. It's never too late, and even children born from parents who've had a terrible diet. I know we had an example of some twins who were born of parents who were drug addicts, and they were adopted by a family into our diet, and they just kind of gorged these children on nutrient-dense foods, including cod liver oil, raw milk, and everything, and they came out of the kind of slump they were in when they were born, and they grew up to be beautiful, healthy children. So it's never too late.
Okay, I think that's a really important message, because I don't want it to come, because you can only do what you can do. If you learn this information.
Well, and only what you know to do, and we all learn these things at the right time. And the other thing I want to say is, if you're not ready for this knowledge, even if it's put in front of you on a silver platter, you're not going to take it. So, as you say, it took actually having a baby for you to make this connection between food and health. And it's a very important connection that modern man has to make. We've lost it, and we have to come back to this connection.
Yeah. And there's so many, posts out there. So for all the women who, are going through experiences with infertility or, even just suboptimal fertility. So, you Google what to eat for fertility and all kinds of stuff comes up. But if you had to kind of advise, what would, I guess, the cliff notes? So, because I know there's a lot of things, eat pea pollen or, royal jelly or whatever.
Well, it
There's
would
just
be
tons of stuff.
full fat dairy, liver, cod liver oil, raw milk, or raw cheese. I mean, those are the number ones.
And then if there was somebody who, what would you say to somebody, I guess, who might be averse to dairy or maybe they have reactions to dairy?
Yeah, well, that's going to be harder, of course. Now, very often they do fine on raw dairy. And again, these things need to be started before you're pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have some kind of reaction while you're pregnant. All these new foods, it's best to start them before you're pregnant. But the first thing I would say is try raw dairy first or full-fat dairy. Very often conventional dairy causes problems, but the full-fat raw dairy does not.
Okay, well, that's definitely good to know. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. There's so much. It's just so important for women to learn this information. And one of the things that I hope is that through time, the shift kind of starts to happen because I guess I would call it kind of like this silent epidemic because people are starting to talk about this infertility thing, but not enough. Like it's not really, I feel like it's still not being discussed.
Well, it's kind of embarrassing. I mean, it just shows that the modern diet's not working. If we can't have babies and replace ourselves for the next generation, and if we can't have healthy babies, there's something very wrong with the dietary advice that's being given.
And it's kind of, I feel like the way it's talked about is kind of in passing, like kind of like the same way I would talk about going to do acupuncture. Like if someone's doing fertility treatments, because it's so common that I don't know if it's looked at as an indication of, I guess I just don't know if it's being looked at as seriously as it is because...
As it should be, yes. And it's really a very serious thing. If one couple in 4, maybe one couple in 3 can't get pregnant, where are we going? We have a declining population. And then so many of the children who are born are damaged. They're predicting 1 child in 2 will have autism in the next 50 years. Who is going to run our governments and make sure the phones work and make sure the roads are repaired and all this? There won't be enough people to do it. And I think we need to wake up and realize where we're going and what is important. And nothing is more important than teaching women of childbearing age how to have healthy babies. I mean, our future is in their hands, basically.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think the hard part when talking about these issues, because I feel like there's so much shame around infertility. And so women are already,
yes.
women and men, because of course it's reflected on you as a woman, like I can't do this, there's something wrong with me. And that all of those feelings. So I feel like it's a very
and
difficult...
then you get a lot of tension about getting pregnant, and that makes it even harder. I'm glad you mentioned the men because I want to tell you a little story. So I have a friend who's a clinician, a nutritionist, and she had a young man come in. He was 26 years old with erectile dysfunction, and that's pretty hard for a man that age. And she told him, I want you to eat a pound of butter and 6 egg yolks a day and come and see me in a month. That's the only advice she gave him. He said, really? And she said, yeah, that's all. You have to eat a pound of butter and 6 egg yolks a day. And 1 month later, he comes in for his appointment, and he waltzes through the door with this big grin, ear to ear. That's all he needed was the good fats.
That's really powerful. And we touched on how it's not only women who it's important to follow this diet, because at the very beginning of the podcast, you mentioned that for couples, who are wanting to conceive, you put both of them on this type of diet.
Oh, absolutely. You need vitamin A, cholesterol, and saturated fats to make testosterone also, not just estrogen, but also testosterone.
Yeah. All right. Well, usually at the end of the show, I've been asking, a couple of questions. We've touched on one of the questions, so I'll only ask one more, but we might have touched on this already, but I'll still ask it. So one of the questions I often ask is for women who are listening, who are currently on the pill, maybe they're not ready to have children right away, but they do know that at some point within the next few years, they're going to want to start a family. How would you advise?
Well, I would advise them to get off the pill, to get a book on fertility awareness. I actually published one called Honoring Your Cycles. It's a very easy read and has the charts in the back for cycling. This needs a very cooperative partner to work with you on this. But that's what I would recommend, is to get off the pill and then get on our diet right away. And hopefully you can do this for at least 6 months and maybe even longer before you get pregnant.
Okay, I think that's solid advice, because one of the things to let your body kind of come down from the hormones, but also, as you mentioned earlier, to try your very best to replenish the vitamins and minerals in your body that are depleted when you're on the pill.
Yes, right. You definitely need to get off that. So.
And is there anything else that you wanted to share based on our conversation today?
Well, just a couple of websites. The Weston A. Price Foundation is westonaprice.org, WESTONAPRICE.org. My own website, newtrendspublishing.com, with my books, Nourishing Traditions, Honoring Our Cycles, and then I think most importantly for our conversation, the Nourishing Traditions book of baby and child care. And we're just about to set up a website for baby and child care called Nourishing Traditions Baby. We'll have that up in a few weeks.
Oh, that's very exciting. I'll make sure to put links to all of the books that you just mentioned, and by the time that this goes live, the website might be live as well. So I'll make sure to link that
good.
as well.
Yeah, well, put it there and just say it's coming soon. Yeah.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for being here today, Sally. It was a pleasure talking with you. And I'm just so excited that my audience is able to learn from you, and hopefully this, makes a difference in the world and helps young women who are struggling.
One mother at a time.
All right. Well, thank you again, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed today's episode, please tweet me at Fertile Friday or stop by the blog and leave a comment in the show notes for today's episode. So you'll find today's episode at fertilityfriday.com/Sally Fallon. You can also find the show notes for all of our podcast episodes at fertilityfriday.com/podcast. And you can find me on Facebook on the Fertility Friday Facebook page. So you'll find that at facebook.com/fertilityfridays with an S. And until next time, be well and happy charting.